but I found, even after almost a week of seeing the images and the stories of the flooding and the devastation from the storm of last week, still very shocking. Very shocking, and it's just hard to sort of fathom the damage and the loss of life and the suffering of so many people who are displaced and still unable to travel. And then a further kind of discouragement and disappointment in the response of so many people, in the response to disruptions in the supply chain, to people hoarding food or panic buying and taking more than they need and not leaving enough for others. I see these stories, I see these images, and I felt so overwhelmed and discouraged and had this question of like, how could this be? I mean, have we not suffered enough? The heat dome in the summer and the atmospheric river of last week, and all within this COVID pandemic that continues to rage throughout the world. It's so easy to be overwhelmed and discouraged and to lose hope. At the same time, I do recall and continue to be moved by the example, inspired by the example of so many who have been generous and selfless in these days. The stories of so many private individuals and summer camps and native communities taking in stranded travelers. Churches, the Sikh community, so many others preparing food and having it delivered to truckers and all those who are still unable to travel. These moments of grace, these moments of blessing do shine through in the midst of these difficult days. But it's no question, it is in these hard times so easy to be discouraged. And to find myself asking the question, why? God, why do you allow this? Where are you in this? How can this be part of the story of a loving God? In these last few weeks, as we come to the end of our church year, the liturgical year, a lot of the readings the church has presented to us at Mass have been from the book of Revelation, also called the book of the Apocalypse, and other kinds of similar writings in the Bible, with extraordinary, vivid images, sometimes frightening images of these sort of apocalyptic type events, which include natural disasters and all kinds of war and disruption and suffering. These readings can be filled with very vivid and frightening images. And it's important to remember the purpose of these books. Why did the Christian community include them in the Bible? And what were they meant for? What is the purpose of these visions? Well, the book of Revelation is very clear that in the midst of all of these terrifying events and very real suffering that was happening at the time it was written to a church that was facing enormous persecution under a seemingly omnipotent empire. The Roman Empire seemed so powerful, the Christian church so small and so powerless. And these visions, these books are written primarily as a message of hope. That no matter what you face, no matter what you encounter, no matter the suffering, no matter the difficulty, no matter the seeming, meaninglessness or difficulty to see how it could all work out, it's a call to hope. And very powerfully in our second reading today, made explicit that Jesus is a King who cares for us in the midst of all of these circumstances, and even the worst kind of suffering. Jesus says in the second reading, I am the Alpha and the Omega. It's the first letter and the last letter of the Greek alphabet. I am the beginning and the end. The beginning of the story is mine. The end of the story is mine. The whole story is his. This Feast of Christ the King is a time to be reminded to hope and to place our hope in Jesus. That he is a good God, a good King who cares for us and takes care of us even in the midst of seeming destruction and very real suffering. It does raise the question, why is it hard to trust God? Why in our everyday lives, and why particularly when faced with profound suffering and disruption as we have in recent days? I went with a priest friend recently to see the movie Dune. Has anybody seen Dune? I feel like you're leaving me hanging, like I'm the only science fiction geek in the room. That's fine, I will own that. It is a fantastic movie, I recommend it. But the book especially is very rich. It's a story of kind of a messianic figure, but it all takes place with the backdrop of political intrigue. There's the emperor, kind of the ruling house, all these noble houses, there's business, kind of commercial interests, and everybody has an angle. And every interaction is always layered with deception. Everybody is pursuing their own interests, but you can't really trust what they're saying. There's a line in the book that the author keeps repeating. It's like feints within feints within feints. It's like deception upon deception upon deception. It is so hard to trust. Now that's a fictional story, obviously, and an extreme example, but I think we experience this in our world. It's hard to trust. I think trust in political leaders is at a pretty near all-time low in recent days. It's hard to have confidence that those who have power will wield it well, will wield it for the common good and not for their own interests, or that it's probably a mix of both, that they're trying to do some public good, but they're still interested in their own needs. It's hard to have confidence that those with power are trustworthy, that I can trust them to take care of my needs, my family, and my community. It's hard to trust because it's rare to find someone trustworthy. Why are we panic buying? Why, when the gas rationing is announced, do we have that impulse to go out and fill up immediately? It's because of a lack of trust. That my neighbor, he might do that. He might go and panic buy. He might take all that's left, and there won't be anything for me. And so I need to go. I need to take care of myself. I need to do what I can to protect me and my own. It's so hard to find someone who is trustworthy. Jesus is an altogether different kind of person and a different kind of king. The choice to trust Jesus is still very difficult, but I'd like to reflect a little on what it means to make this choice to trust him. The past several weeks here at All Saints, we've been reflecting on kind of the essential message of the gospel. What is the essential good news that Jesus came to bring? The famous passage, John 3:16, God so loved the world, he sent his only Son, that we might have life in him. The Feast of Christ the King brings up this theme very powerfully. Jesus is the generous King who made us out of love. Just the idea of us, he loves so much, he created us to live in love with him. Jesus is the heartbroken King who's saddened, whose heart breaks at our separation from him. When we choose ourselves or choose other things over him, he's the heartbroken King who desires to be reunited with us. He's the Savior King, the King who strips himself of everything, who comes as man to suffer and offer himself to reunite us with him, to bring us back into his kingdom. And he's the loving and benevolent King who invites us to make that choice, to choose to be part of his kingdom, to choose to hope and to trust that he does care for us. I'd like to offer an image, something to take away from this morning, to kind of ponder and stick with this question of who is Jesus to me and how do I choose to enter his kingdom. When I was in high school, I had an interest in politics. I know what you're thinking, science fiction, politics, gosh, it must have been so popular in high school. Very popular, yes. But yeah, I loved following politics, I loved kind of being involved in it, and I had something of a fantasy of after high school, getting into federal politics, and eventually, of course, becoming Prime Minister of Canada. Well, God had a slightly different plan. However, a number of years ago, I was visiting a friend in Ottawa. I was already ordained a priest, and he was working as a page to one of the members of Parliament, and he took me onto the floor of the House of Commons. They weren't in session, just a little tour of the Parliament. And I got to sit in the Prime Minister's chair. And I just remember thinking, God's sense of humor, that I had kind of fantasized about sitting in this chair one day, and here I was sitting in a very different way as a priest. But I was struck by the Prime Minister's chair is the same as everyone else's. It's not a throne, it's not set apart, it's not even distinct in any way. It's the same as the other members of the House of Commons. And it got me thinking today about this feast of Christ the King, and what kind of throne does Jesus sit upon, and what do we imagine him sitting upon? And certainly represented in artwork and throughout the ages, there's been a tendency to exalt Jesus and to have him on this kind of ornate throne up above us in majesty, and someone, the object of our worship and of our submission. And there's elements, of course, of truth and beauty in that, but I don't find that image too helpful, especially today. The kind of throne Jesus actually chose, the throne that Jesus took upon himself, is of course the cross. Jesus is the King who stripped himself of everything to humble himself and make himself available, radically available to us. But sometimes even the cross can be a little difficult to relate with. We have, here in the church, we have the crucifix in our homes, but sometimes there can be a little bit of a separation. It feels so radical and so separate from my experience some days. I don't know how to relate to this Jesus on the cross. So I'd like to offer this image and for you to reflect on what kind of chair, what kind of throne does Jesus sit upon in your life, in your home, among your family and your friends. Perhaps it's the IKEA kitchen chair, sitting beside you at the dining room table. Perhaps he's sitting beside you on the sofa at night as you wind down and watch television. Perhaps he's in the passenger seat of your car as you leave Mass today, and in the midst of everything, in the midst of the anger and road rage you can feel, he's there. When we snap at the kids or lose our patience, he's there. In the moments of the joy and of feeling connection with a spouse, he's there. He's there in all of it. He's there in humility. He's there as a trustworthy, loving presence who desires to bring us hope, desires to help us, to take care of us, and to guide us through difficult days and through blessed days. So let us, as we continue our Mass and as we leave from this place after Mass, keep this image in mind. Jesus is a King who's offering us a choice. He's inviting us to choose to accept him, to choose to trust him, to choose to hope in him. Let us choose to accept this offer and to be members of the kingdom of hope, the kingdom of love, a kingdom with a King who cares for us and takes care of our needs.